Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. Where in the world is Tim Mak? Well, Tim is back in Kyiv, where he does a remarkable job reporting on the ground about the war, about the people of Ukraine. Tim, welcome back. Great to have you.
Thanks so much for having me again.
There's been a lot of talk in the United States about a ceasefire. What does that really mean?
Well, look, I mean, this is all a political demand, right? That Donald Trump and maybe only Donald Trump is the person who wants to come in here and enforce peace in Ukraine. But he hasn't given a lot of carrots out. He's given a lot of sticks out, particularly to Ukraine, which has been until now very much reliant on the United States as its closest partner. And so he said, I want to make peace. I don't care what it takes to do to make that outcome occur. So there have been a bunch of discussions. There have been concepts of a plan. There have been, outlines and ideas of a plan. Right now, what they're discussing is a prohibition on attacking civilian infrastructure and a prohibition on any sort of use of force in the Black Sea on the water. Um, now, the White House has said, hey, we've got some sort of deal put together, but when this would start, how this would take place, over what territory, and how long it might be, we don't have any understanding of that.
Now, a prohibition on attacking civilian infrastructure, that's sort of interesting because you're not really supposed to do that in a war. So is this a demand that Russia stop committing at least one category of war crimes? Are we
Well,
implicitly accepting that this has been okay up till now?
we're getting deep into international humanitarian law here, but for example, if you were to hit a electrical substation that primarily if, provides power to a military command, for example, that's energy infrastructure that is not necessarily used for primarily civilian purposes, and that's not a war crime. But if you hit a power substation that provides heat to the people of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, it's very arguable that that's a war crime. What they're dealing with here is not about what is right or wrong. They're not dealing with issues of accountability in law right now. What they're dealing with is, can we reduce the number that the Trump administration's perspective is, can we reduce the number of categories of violence that are occurring and slowly phase out violence permanently? It's very, very unlikely to work because it doesn't really acknowledge what everyone else knows to be true, which is that neither side really sees peace as an option right now. You may have seen, Jen, that the intelligence community of the United States, they put out an annual threats briefing. And that briefing lays out what America's adversaries generally think at any given time. And what it outlined, in contrast to what the Trump administration is currently negotiating around, it says that both Putin and Zelensky probably see the risk of a longer war as less than those of an unsatisfying settlement. That's from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, right? So Trump's own government, own intelligence assessments says that it's very unlikely that we're going to get the two sides to come together. And what that is because Putin still sees a lot of progress on the battlefield, and Zelensky has a lot of domestic pressures against him that will punish him if he tries to strike a bad deal. And right now, it looks like there's nothing but a bad deal on offer.
So as of this moment, the war goes on, correct? There has not been
That's
an
right.
imposition.
That's right. There was just an air raid siren here in Kyiv a few minutes ago.
Wow. And where does the battlefield lie? The Ukrainians were forced to withdraw from a portion or most of territory that they had captured in Russia. Where do things stand as of this moment?
Well, Russia is making very slow but very costly progress in eastern Ukraine. We're seeing these numbers are staggering here. We're seeing casualties of 1,000 or 1,500 people, Russian soldiers per day. I mean, this is not a long-term sustainable thing, but the general sense of it is that Putin is making progress over very small bits of territory, but in a consistent, incremental way.
The North Korean soldiers, we heard that they had been introduced. Are they still there? Are they effective? Are there more of them, fewer of them than there were?
Not, well, what we've heard is that actually just today we learned from South Korean intelligence that thousands of new soldiers have been new North Korean soldiers have been pushed forward to the front line. That another 3,000 North Korean soldiers have now been pushed to the Kursk region, where most of these North Korean soldiers are engaged in combat. Earlier, what we heard from South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff is that 4,000 Korean soldiers have already been killed. North Korean soldiers have already been killed or wounded on the battlefield. So it's not even quite enough to replenish the losses that have already existed. That said, there's still a huge surge of thousands of North Korean soldiers that are now emerging on the battlefield.
And is this a strategy that can succeed, in essence, using the North Korean soldiers as fodder because the casualty rates have been so high for Russia? Is this a sustainable plan?
It's not a sustainable plan if what you imagine is the Russian troops physically at this pace taking over the entirety of Ukraine. This would take decades, if not over a century at this pace, right? That's not going to happen. But where Putin has failed on the battlefield, he now seeks to claim a victory through political means. And what he's trying to do is create enough pressure on Ukraine to use his friend in the White House to put enough pressure on Ukraine to get them to give up or agree to a bad deal, to give up territory that Ukraine hasn't even lost at this moment. That's the real worry here, that Ukraine is going to lose on a political level, not on a military level, and that's where Trump's pressure on Ukraine really comes to bear.
And he hasn't put any pressure that I can see on Putin, on the other hand. So this seems to be, at least from the United States vantage point, that he is doing Putin's business, trying to force a premature end to the war in Russia's favor that would foreclose these losses and, in essence, hand a victory to Putin. Is there some other pressure that he's applying on the Putin side that you can
The
see?
vast majority of what you've seen over the last couple months in this second Trump term has been the American view that Ukraine is some sort of vassal state. And the anger that you see from JD Vance or Trump in the Oval Office or in any of the negotiations between now and then, it's all been based on this idea that we're angry about Ukraine because they're not doing what they say like a good vassal state ought to do. They're not an independent country, right? Which is feeding directly into Russian propaganda on Ukraine and why there is a war to begin with. Ukraine, of course, believes that they're fighting for their right to exist. And that's where I stand as well. I mean, that they're fighting for their right to exist. The thing is, going forward, Ukraine is getting boxed in where they're going to either have to choose between opposing, defying the United States government and turning down a bad deal, or Zelensky is going to have to look at his own people and say, I had to sign a bad deal because it was all we were going to get. Though, that's the kind of calculation that the Kremlin is absolutely loving right now, to put Zelensky in a lose-lose situation. And then over time, just because the fighting stops, the Russians are not going to stop in their desire to take over Ukraine. This is going to be a years-long, if not decades-long project for Russia to continue to crush around the edges Ukrainian sovereignty.
Now, when you say that the Vance Trump rhetoric feeds into Russian propaganda, I would say it is Russian propaganda that they are on the receiving end. They are helping to amplify Putin. And that's certainly what it appears to be from the United States. How is the arms, the intelligence loss, either current or potential from the United States affecting Ukraine? Have those things now been stopped? And what is the ability to replace and replenish those going forward?
So there was a pause of intelligence and arms for about a week. It's been, from what I can tell, it has resumed. But you'll find that if you look at what happened during that week, that was the week of the maximalist withdrawal that Ukraine had to do from the Kursk region. They'd kind of been blinded overnight. And in our reporting, what we say is that that Ukraine probably was going to have so much pressure put on its position in the Kursk region anyways that it would have to find some way to withdraw to save the lives of their people. But that this aid pause and this intelligence pause greatly amplified and sped that up. So that was a huge problem. And in the long term, you and I have had this conversation. Trust is something that takes years to build, and you can lose it in an instant. And you can't turn on and off American aid like this because once you turn it off one time, no one will ever trust you or rely on you sufficiently again. And it becomes not a partnership, but a transaction. And that's what I think the view from Ukraine right now is we need the United States, but it's not kinship. It's not a friendship. It's just business. We cannot rely on the United States. They don't share our values. They don't see this as a fight for democracy as we do anymore. We're going to have to find other partners to try to fill in the gaps wherever we can. Now, Europe has been a much more staunch supporter of Ukraine, but it really does fall behind in some of the defense manufacturing capability, and no one can really match the intelligence capabilities of the United States. That said, when and if Zelensky gets boxed into this position where he has to choose between the United States or a really bad deal, a third option is to try to just go on alone anyways, and and rely primarily on Europe with fewer arms, fewer provision of intelligence sharing, but still the fight to go on. And I have to tell you that I don't think that the Ukrainians are at this point ready to just roll over and play dead here. I think there's still a lot of fight here in Ukraine.
Couple quick questions. First, what is the status of this so-called minerals deal? And secondly, Germany announced a major commitment to increase arms production. How real is that, and how quickly could that show up on the battlefield in Ukraine?
Well, on the Germany question, you can't just snap your fingers and create factories, right? These are years-long projects. I know Europe right now is in the process of rearmament, and what they're trying to do is they're going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars, if not more than $1 trillion, in increasing the continent's resilience. But you can't create manufacturing plants you've tried to hire people, Jen. It takes months sometimes to hire the right person for a role, let alone building factories that didn't exist yesterday and make, everything from environmental studies to planning to architecture to process. I mean, this is a process that's gonna continue through to when my hair is growing fully gray. I mean, we're getting there, but we're not quite there. So this is a long-term process. The Germans, they're headed in the right direction. Partly they're headed in that direction because they feel they can't rely on the United States anymore. But this is not something that's going to change the course of the war right now. And I'm sorry, you had a second question there that I need to.
The minerals deal.
Right. The minerals deal, the United States and Ukraine appear to have once again come to some sort of broad agreement. Now, they haven't signed this deal yet. And after the Oval Office spat, basically the United States said, well, the terms have changed and the price has actually gone up. So, we'll see what the details of those deals are. There's been no official uh, specifics on what that deal looks like. There have been some reports from lawmakers here in Kyiv that have seen the deal and have described it, but I don't want to get ahead of it because this is constantly, the terms are constantly changing. So the deal is apparently there's been progress on negotiations to a deal. It looks like both sides still intend to sign a deal, but we haven't gotten formal explanations of what the details might involve or confirmation that it will be signed.
Well, the people who are in favor of a strong defense for Ukraine thought that the minerals deal might be a way of getting the United States to deepen its commitment to Ukraine, because after all, if we have a financial stake, we don't want the Russians coming in and invading. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore, because whatever the minerals deal is, Trump is still pressuring Ukraine to make a deal with Russia. So is the minerals deal still providing any additional security for Ukraine? At this point, it just seems to try to mollify Trump on something that was supposed to be a solution for Ukraine. And now they're just trying to hold on to the deal to prevent it from deteriorating further.
Yeah, I mean, it only provides security if you believe that playing to Trump's ego will help Ukraine's long-term interests. And I've always been of the opinion that there's no level of sucking up to Trump that you'll do that you can trust that he'll do what he
Yes.
says.
Yes.
And so, but that has been the advice from so many people to the Zelensky administration that if they suck up enough and they suck up in the right way, they will benefit. And I think the last couple of months have shown that that's not going to be the case. That said, anyone who thinks that a critical minerals deal is going to lead to any sort of actual substantive security guarantees or even security assurances doesn't understand the business of critical minerals, which involves years of surveys and license agreements and receiving the right approvals from government bodies. We're talking 3 to 7 years to even get the approval to start digging things out of the ground. And then after that, very many years to actually excavate and then find a profitable business. Mining is a very, very long-term business proposition. So with Russia looking to breathe down the neck of Kyiv at any point in the next 3 to 4 or 5 years, it's you and I both know that Putin, even if he signs some sort of ceasefire or we even get to a peace agreement, he's not going to just say, okay, well, that was a good try. I guess I'm going to give up on my imperialist ambitions now. He's not going to do that. So, does it provide near-term security guarantees? No, because the nature of critical minerals itself, you're not going to start digging or creating any infrastructure that's worth protecting for years to come. It's really all based around this foolish notion that if you suck up to Trump enough and you give him what he thinks is a good enough deal that he can wave around and say it was the best deal of all time, that's gonna let him that's gonna kind of create a pathway for him to do what you want him to do. It's a bad strategy from the very outset.
So, final question for you. We have found that every time Trump makes an aggressive move against a country, whether it's Denmark or Canada, the leadership of that country finds a new wave of support. There is a rally around the flag because countries don't like being bullied. They don't like being dictated to by the United States. Is Zelensky enjoying that increased solidarity from Ukraine? Has that continued, or are people becoming again more critical, more wary? Does he have an internal public opinion problem?
No, I think he does face, as the war goes on, as it continues, there are going to be pressures on Zelensky. But you're right, absolutely, to say that people don't like to be lectured to. And Zelensky was seen by Ukrainian citizens as having stood up for the dignity of their country and the sovereignty of their country. And his approval rating, I saw one poll today that showed it close to 70%. That's pretty good. That's pretty
It's
good
pretty good.
for
It's
any country. It's certainly unthinkable in the American context. We haven't seen someone like that with an approval rating like that in the White House for a very long time. And so, yeah, you absolutely do see this rallying effect. Um, it's not going to be permanent, but it does show that Ukrainians do want some real pushback against what is essentially being held hostage by the United States.
Tim, it is always fascinating talking to you. You have a level of granular detail that is so far above what we normally get. It's always a pleasure. Stay safe, be well, and we will look forward to talking to you next time, wherever in the world you may be.
Jen, so great to see you.
You too. Bye bye.